Ani no Nishnabik, Ani Chimukmanik, Gimme Gwitch, Gugamijiang, Gishagan, Indigenous Cause Gate Canoe. My name is Gordon Henry. I'm a professor in the English department at Michigan State University, and I want to welcome you all to Unsettling Genealogies. Tonight we have two speakers. We had to change the schedule a little bit. One of our speakers had a change of plans for tonight. And as we go on, I want to just say that the opinions or views and experiences expressed by individual panelists should not be considered as the opinions or views of Michigan State University's governing board, administration, faculty, staff, or students and conference organizers. Also be reminded that this is not a forum for you to find out about your personal individual genealogy. So please refrain from asking panelists and hosts questions about how you can find some native relative that you have not yet found. So our first speaker tonight is Lianna Costantino. She is a grandmother and a Cherokee Nation citizen from Oklahoma. She's a former chair of Cherokee Healing and Wellness Coalition and a former chair of the Center for Native Health. Lianna has served as a police officer, paramedic, and midwife. She's co-founder of TAF, the Tribal Alliance Against Fraud. She is a Cherokee storyteller and artist, as well as a language instructor. Lianna spent the winter of 2016 at Standing Rock as a paramedic and midwife. Welcome, Lianna.
Sio negad, Lianna Costantino Daguado, Genealogies, Gayalena, Gei, Galialiga, Jigadoha. Hi, everybody. My name is Lianna Costantino. I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and I live in North Carolina, and I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm the director of the Tribal Alliance Against Frauds, as Gordon mentioned, and I'd like to share a bit tonight about what we do, what kinds of things we see, and the very real harm that pretendians and pretendianism cause for American Indian people. The Tribal Alliance Against Frauds is an intertribal anti-fraud task force that's a coalition of American Indians who are citizens of various federally recognized communities who are committed to protecting the sovereignty of existing tribes and endeavor to safeguard them against cultural and identity theft by alerting the public and other appropriate institutions and government entities to the presence of people or groups who falsely claim to be American Indians or tribes, especially when they are making a profit from it and or taking away resources intended for Indians. But please keep in mind that I am not going to be talking about people who simply believe in their unfounded family myth of having American Indian ancestry, although I would encourage anyone who does to actually check it out by doing their genealogy properly and then submitting it to the tribe in question for verification. If it's true, I'd encourage them to connect with their tribe in whatever way is permitted. And if it turns out to be false, I'd encourage them to put that story away and learn what it means to become an ally rather than a pretendian. We encourage people to do their genealogy. And when you discover that you actually have no American ancestry, American Indian ancestry, we encourage you to accept that, to honor your own ancestors rather than ignoring them in favor of a stranger's ancestors, and then become that ally. Cherokees are supposed to be trying to follow something we refer to as Duyukta'i in our language, which means basically the right path, the straight and narrow, the right way of doing things. We value Dohi, which is peace, well-being, a balance in things. And it strikes me that somebody who's lying about who they are is the very opposite of that. And that seems like some pretty bad medicine to me. At the very core of someone's being, they're wearing a mask, they're being deceptive, and that is not very Cherokee. Ironic, as they falsely claim to be Cherokee and then tell us they don't think we're behaving like Cherokees on the occasions when we point out that they actually have no connection to us. They clearly have no idea how real Cherokees behave or why, which is kind of the point of my entire presentation tonight. So I'm going to see how much of this I can get through, because this is actually 4 presentations combined into one in tonight's time slot. So we'll see what we can do. So the title of tonight's webinar is De-Socializing Tribe, Family, and Kinship, Pretendians Marginalization of Citizens of Sovereign Tribes. We are going to see an extremely powerful example of that at the end of tonight's webinar. So please stay till the end if you can. It's going to be very powerful, and it is going to tie everything together and give you the example of what this particular evening is about. So Indians go into places like Native Studies and Native American Student Associations, etc., and find themselves among purportedly Native or Indigenous faculty, and there are often few there that we can relate to, if anyone at times. The pretendians often rule the roost at this point, and we often literally get bullied out of their way because they have built their entire careers around a mythological persona, one which usually pays all their bills, and they flock together to protect one another from any pesky real Indian who might challenge their vacuous claims. They use monolithic terms like indigenous and dismiss the importance of the collectivist cultures of American Indians, our tribal cultures, our kinship ties, and they create new models and raise them up, oftentimes with new age ideas based on distorted prophecies, like their idea of what our prophecies mean, that they have conflated all together and used as weapons to dismiss the concerns of real Indians as colonized ideas, which we will look at in a moment further. So I always say that they are slowly erasing us by replacing us. That's the danger that I see with this. So being an Indian is not about who you claim to be. It's about who claims you. So what's wrong with claiming to be an Indian when you can't prove you have any Indian ancestry at all and no tribe is claiming you? When you have nothing other than an unfounded, unverified family myth to base it on? People who actually are American Indians have ancestors and family who have actually faced the genocide, racism, discrimination, abuse, and hardships that Indians face for being Indian specifically. The Trail of Tears and other removals, the boarding schools, things like that are not ancient history for us. And they're traumatic. And they have resulted in something called intergenerational grief and trauma, which we've known about for many years and have been dealing with, and I think are rising above because we are resilient people. But these things were still traumatic, and they are not ancient history to us. There is a story of one person that I know who talked about his dad being honored at a play that was written about this period, and his dad told him he didn't want to go. And he asked, well, why don't you want to go? They're going to honor you, and this is our history and stuff. And he's like, I don't need to be reminded of our history. I don't need to be reminded of what happened. I am not in any jeopardy of forgetting what happened. And why would these people traumatize me all over again? Why would they do that to me? And if you think about it in that context, it kind of gives you a new way of looking at that kind of thing. The last survivor of the Trail of Tears, Rebecca Nuygen, died in 1932 at approximately 97 years of age. But she and others who were on the trail still have many living descendants, like myself, who know their stories intimately. And for us, it does not feel like ancient history. There are survivors of Indian boarding schools today still processing their trauma and rising above it to break those cycles of abuse imposed upon them at those schools. Richard Henry Pratt founded the Carlisle Indian Boarding School in Pennsylvania and said, "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man." A pretendian recently told me at a conference that he had our best interests at heart. It was all I could do to just walk away. While flower children were playing at Native American ceremonies in the 1960s and 1970s, it was still illegal for actual Indians to practice our ceremonies in the United States, a country supposedly founded in part on the premise of seeking religious freedom, just not for everybody. Casual claims of being Native American or Cherokee when you don't even know who your supposed Cherokee family were, don't fly. It's kind of like going to Scotland and claiming to be Scottish when you're not a citizen of Scotland and you're not involved with Scottish life, you can have no vote there, etc. It's remote at best, if it's true at all. So again, we are very resilient people. I like to think in an asset-based way instead of a deficit-based way, you know, especially with teaching. But it should still be acknowledged, it's very important, that people pretending to be members of a marginalized group that have legitimately survived all of this are mocking those survivors and are entirely incapable of claiming any sort of shared experience, knowledge, or perspective with those marginalized people. It is a white privilege to be able to learn about the genocide against American Indian people when your family never suffered from any of it. Peggy Ayers has said, becoming aware of privilege should not be viewed as a burden or a source of guilt, blame, or shame, but rather an opportunity to learn and to be responsible so that we may work toward a more just and inclusive world together. So just as an example, when we're talking about ceremonies and stuff, would you walk into a Catholic church as a non-Catholic person on Sunday morning, dressed up as a priest, and perform Mass and communion and not expect outrage when the congregants discover you've never even been a Catholic? That's a flawed analogy, I know, for a lot of reasons, but it's an analogy that many non-American Indian people can at least comprehend when we try to explain why someone who is not Cherokee, for example, should not be running around claiming to be Cherokee and performing fake Cherokee ceremonies. For me, this kind of is akin to stolen valor, and that's another conversation entirely, and I don't mean to conflate the two and take away from the veterans, but I think you can see kind of the comparison there. For us, it's very serious. I'll quote a couple of people who are fantastic people who can't be here during this series. United States Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, who is Muskogee, writes, "We have had to contend with an onslaught of what we call pretendians, that is, non-Indigenous people assuming a Native identity. DNA tests are setting up other problems involving those who discover Native American DNA in their bloodline. When individuals assert themselves as Native when they are not culturally Indigenous, and if they do not understand their tribal nation's history or participate in their tribal nation's society, who benefits? Not the people or communities of the identity being claimed. It's hard to see this as anything other than an individual's capitalist claim, just another version of a colonial offense. Take, take, take. Take whatever you want." Rebecca Nagel of the Cherokee Nation voiced a similar position in 2019, writing for High Country News that pretendians perpetuate the myth that Native identity is determined by the individual, not the tribe or community, directly undermining tribal sovereignty and Native self-determination. To protect the rights of Indigenous people, pretendians like Wages and Warren must be challenged, and the retelling of their false narratives must be stopped. So why do people do this? If we have time, I'm going to play a little clip from Faith Spotted Eagle, but in the meantime, I'm going to go here. And Gordon, will you jump in and give me a 5-minute warning? You get a chance. So there are several possible explanations for why people adopt pretendian identities. Lakota poet Trevino Brings-Plenty writes, "To wear an underrepresented people's skin is enticing. I get it. To feast on struggle, to explore imagined roots, to lay the foundational work for academic jobs and publishing opportunities." Patrick Wolf argues that the problem is more structural, stating that settler colonial ideology actively needs to erase and then reproduce Indigenous identity in order to create and justify claims to land and territory. Deloria also explores the white American dual fascination with the vanishing Indian versus the idea that by playing Indian, the white man can then be the true inheritor and preserver of authentic American identity and connection to the land, aka Indianness. Kim Tallbear said, "I think there is a deep desire to disown complicity in the settler project. I think people don't want to feel the historical guilt for living on stolen land. And I'm not saying they are obviously or explicitly thinking these things. I think a lot of this stuff is subconscious. They stole our children. They stole our land. Now they have stolen our representations, cultural artifacts. They stole Indigenous bones and blood to do scientific research on them. All of these things are entangled." So I'm going to give an example now of a young woman. She's a young pretendian who provides a good example of extractive behavior in collecting Indians in order to create a shield of protection from the inevitable raised eyebrows of Indians who are not buying her story. She has claimed to be a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Now she's backpedaling and saying she's a descendant. What she doesn't understand is that she is still claiming Cherokee identity, and she has no Cherokee ancestry whatsoever. As a second or third generation Stanford student, she comes from a financially advantaged background. This story is about someone that is claiming our history and attempting to own our culture for their own benefit. And benefits, as we know, can be numerous in academia. This young woman has won over very loving, wonderful, and some highly respected Cherokee people. But even though she might have manipulated her way into a few individuals' lives, the fact remains that our nations have a stance on this issue. We strongly reject the notion that people can assume our identity without proof. We have a tri-council resolution of all three Cherokee tribes that was passed last year against frauds, and a Cherokee scholar's statement on identity and sovereignty that I'm going to share with you in a bit. One important piece of data I think resonates is that the last US Census showed that over 60% of the people identified as Cherokee are not even recognized by us at all. The number of people who identify as Native American on the US Census has soared in recent years by 86% from 2010 to 2020. That is a much bigger jump than can possibly be explained by birth rates. It's race shifting. It's self-identifying with nothing to back it up with. So this person I'm talking about right now falls directly into this category of checking that box because she can, and nobody questions it. We welcome allies and descendants that don't have family on our rolls so they can't be citizens. We still welcome them, we still honor them. But this young woman is not an ally when she claims to be one of us with nothing to back it up with. Unlike our descendants, she has no proof of a family history. Unlike us, she has no lived experience of being a Cherokee. She just popped along on the scene and started claiming it. Nobody challenged her. People welcomed her in. She's very sweet. She's very pretty. She's smart. And people accepted her. Many years ago, people could get away with a claim as a descendant but because of digital resources, these claims can no longer hide behind an ambiguous designation. And this person has gained access to many resources meant for Cherokee people. We share many things freely with our allies and our descendants, but because she has claimed something she is not, all she has received, which include personal teachings of our language, culture, prayers, people, are all under false identity. She has appropriated our identity for her personal and professional benefits, and this is wrong, and we expect more from prestigious universities as well. As stolen children are being found by the thousands and finally returned home, as many universities are being challenged today to do better, truth and reconciliation are no longer just words. Their manifestation is being demanded. Dr. Raymond Reyes says, truth is a precondition for justice, and justice is a precondition for healing and reconciliation. The truth has to come out. A few anonymous quotes from several Cherokees who have had to tolerate this person, both in North Carolina and in California. One person said, behind a smile, she has conned her way into Cherokee lives by claiming to be one of us and going unchallenged to learn more about our culture from people who may not have otherwise shared sacred things with her, traditional knowledge. It's gross. Another person said, she is getting access to things that most non-Cherokees never would. Many pretendians are extractive from a distance. She's invasive with a charming smile. Another one said, I think it's important to note she's not necessarily just race shifting. Race is not our issue, and many pretendians want us to go down that road for a straw man argument. It's another way that they try to deflect. It's about factual identity. This isn't about race. She is simply not Cherokee in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to switch over now to talking about the very real harm that pretendians do. They take away scholarships, grants, and other forms of financial assistance from actual Indian students who usually need it a lot more. They take away all kinds of financial and creative opportunities from actual American Indian people, from the sale of arts and crafts to movie roles and other jobs. The Indian Arts and Crafts Act does not protect us because they allow state-recognized tribes, which are not really tribes. We refer to them as CPAINs, corporations posing as American Indian nations. They are not, nor will they ever be, tribes. With a very few, I would say maybe 4%, just a wild guess, of state recognized tribes currently deserve federal recognition. The rest will never get it. They present false depictions of modern Indian life and distorted narratives of Indian history and culture, especially language and spirituality. These false depictions actually recreate American Indian culture in the image of settlers who have twisted it into something unrecognizable to the American Indians it was stolen from. I say they are erasing us by replacing us, by putting this final nail into the coffin of our genocide, and it is a slow boil. They speak as if they are speaking from a native perspective when they are not. When they go to speak in schools and museums, etc., the audience accepts at face value that these pretendians are legitimate American Indians and that they know what they're talking about. The audience walks away with misinformation that they then just pass along to others, and it snowballs. Sometimes people pretending to be American Indian medicine people actually harm or kill people with their fake medicine and ceremonies. Examples include the non-Indian man who killed several people in his fake sweat lodge in Arizona, and the non-Indian woman falsely claiming to be a Cherokee medicine woman who killed someone in a fake ceremony on the beach by burying her in the sand to rebirth her, and the victim suffocated. Some are cultural thieves and predatory profiteers who make a lot of money selling their fake ceremonies, their books, their fake art, etc. Some, like a fake so-called tribe in Georgia, opened their own Cherokee National Bank, printed their own Cherokee money that they refer to as the crane, based on a fraudulent premise that they are a sovereign American Indian nation. And people believe it or are afraid to question it or just don't know how to. They were shut down, by the way. Every single one of these examples and every fake so-called tribe in existence is populated primarily by non-American Indian people who believed their unfounded, unverified family myth of having some vague Native American ancestry that they never bothered to confirm, which never actually existed, around which they built an entire persona and life. Very often, when their family myth is definitively disproved, they suffer cognitive dissonance and refuse to accept the evidence before them, and a wannabe is unfortunately born. Like the young man who won a national hoop dancing championship. This was at the Heard Museum in 2019. This actually should have gone to an actual Indian hoop dancer. And the Heard Museum, I have to say, totally worked with us, changed their policies, doing a great job. At the time, though, he had complied with their requirements of providing a tribal ID card. But so many of these groups are fake, it's really hard to vet them. So we're working with the Heard Museum now, and they are doing a fantastic job. But that young man is of purely Western European and Filipino ancestry, no Native American ancestry. Another example is the man of purely Western European descent who dressed himself up in a costume, and it's not regalia when somebody steals it, falsely referred to himself as a Cherokee elder and medicine man, even though no Cherokees had ever heard of him, and literally traveled the world as such, literally all over the world. He made good friends with a Maori community in New Zealand, an elder from which encouraged him to go to the United Nations with her to represent his people, which he did, falsely attempting to represent a sovereign nation he did not belong to without their knowledge or consent. He was also shut down. Another example is the non-Cherokee woman who presumes to center herself in various Indian affairs as a non-Indian, such as the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls movement, when she and her husband, who calls himself a chief, associate with and employed a child molester and another man who was convicted and sentenced to prison recently for trafficking in child pornography. So I don't really think that's who we need representing any of us within the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls movement if they can't even figure out that their best friends and business partners are pedophiles and child porn traffickers. It has been historically either illegal or very dangerous for an Indian to be an Indian in this country. That hasn't changed much. So when non-Indian people decide to play Indian because it suits them, because they suddenly find it cool, or decide they are unhappy with the religion they grew up with and think they can just take our spiritual practices and twist them as they please, that is an insult to every Indian who was punished or killed for looking like an Indian. for speaking our language, for singing or dancing prayers, or for just being Indian, being an Indian in the wrong place and time. Every person who wears a headdress to a Halloween party is slapping the face of every Indian student who couldn't wear a feather at graduation. Every fake vision quest performed by a pretendian is a slap to every Indian who is not allowed to even gather their traditional medicine anymore because now their ancestral backyard medicine cabinet is a national forest owned by the United States. It is an insult to see these non-Indian people erasing us by replacing us at powwows, at universities, with scholarships that were intended for Indian students, with non-Indian professors who bully actual Indian professors and students as self-identified Indians who paid $30 to join a fake state-recognized tribe. For us, being Indian is not a fashion choice, a fad, or a game. It is who we are every day, all of our lives, usually in community. So a few tactics used by pretendians. Some are collectors. These people collect real Indians as friends and take as many pictures with them as possible to post on social media. This helps them make them look legit. Making friends with Indians by telling them you're an Indian, especially when you know you're not, is especially manipulative and toxic. It results in a sense of betrayal when people find out someone lied. It is divisive among Indians when the friends of the pretendian feel a sense of loyalty and defend the pretendian to their fellow Indians, often referred to as being a defendian. So when real Indians take up for pretendians, that's just especially toxic and gross. And it's not the fault of the Indians either. This is all of the blame here. The onus is on these pretendians, the kind and wonderful people they are betraying with their lies. They take copious photos of themselves in Indian costumes, doing Indian things in Indian places. They love Indian crafts, and they probably bead better than you do. They join Indian causes on social media and in real life, often performatively. They spend time helping, developing friendships and loyalties which they will assuredly exploit when their dubious claims are eventually challenged. They try their best to make themselves relevant in Indian spaces. They change their names legally to things like Mashu Whitefeather or so-and-so Riverwind. They love beautiful Indian names like Fluffy Turtle Sitting Eagle, anything to look and sound like a real Indian. They deflect, attack, harass, and bully. Anyone who challenges them is a colonizer. They threaten frivolous lawsuits for defamation, libel, slander. They threaten physical violence and intimidate people physically. But here's a little heads up. The truth, backed up by hard evidence, is the defense against libel, slander, or defamation. They tell fictional stories of trauma and drama intended to quell any possible challenge. Because who's going to challenge somebody's identity when they're crying about the horrible stories that their families never actually endured? They tell real Indians whose families were removed, displaced, that their families were brave and they didn't cower before the colonizers, remaining in their homelands, hiding in a cave, and refusing to be enrolled like dogs. In other words, they are insulting the very people they are falsely claiming to be. Terms like paper genocide, $5 Indian, paper Indian, and colonizer get thrown around in frenzies of defensiveness when the person throwing them around doesn't even know what they mean. They are also intended to make having their vague claims challenged look like some sort of petty personal attack. It's all about the deflection. Pretendians study native languages. They learn our crafts. They make our regalia. They use the words sovereign and nation when they make up names for their fake tribes. They study us in order to mimic us, but invariably their imitation is in no way flattering. And another red flag there, aho, is uttered constantly. Deflection, avoidance, red herrings, and whataboutisms are big tactics with pretendians. We hear this all the time. I don't have to prove anything to you. Well, I had to prove to my tribe that I am who I say I am. Anyone who has been disconnected due to the diaspora that was the Trail of Tears and then finds their way back will have to prove who they are to the tribe. So I don't know what makes these guys think they're special. You're not behaving very native, but my DNA, my cheekbones, my shovel teeth, and 20 other things that should make them native. You're acting like a colonizer. I'm telling on you to your chief for being mean to me. Those are popular. They bring up things like DNA, blood quantum, skin color, etc., and accuse us of being guilty of lateral violence against our fellow Indians, when in fact, we never brought any of that up, and none of that applies to them anyway as non-Indians. They make American Indian identity about race when it's actually about sovereignty, authenticity, kinship connection, and political designation. We are of many races, but we are all citizens of historically established sovereign nations. Spiritual bypassing is another tactic. Why are you being so mean to me? We're all God's children. Mitakuyasin. We're all indigenous if you go back far enough. No one owns ceremony. Well, I was an Indian chief in a past life. Excuses that we hear for why people can't prove they're Cherokee, for example. I don't need a card in my wallet to prove who I am. Well, in that case, you should burn your driver's license, your social security card, and your passport, or you're just a hypocrite. My ancestors hid to avoid being documented. Well, in the case of Cherokee people, that is true for some of us, and they are now known as the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, all very well documented. And we do not live in a vacuum, so if anyone in your family was a Cherokee, there is a very good chance that you are going to be connected to other relatives who were documented, even if somehow your relatives magically weren't. My granny wouldn't lie. Well, nobody said your grandmother lied. Your grandmother probably didn't lie. Nobody in your family probably lied, but these mistakes happen all the time with same name syndrome problems, with checking the rolls, looking for your family member. You see somebody with the same name, or name changes at Ellis Island. We had a family once who came over here from Germany. Their last name was Barr. It got changed to Bear because of bad penmanship when they came over. They were here in North Carolina, and they figured with a name like Bear, living in North Carolina, they must be Cherokee. But it was a simple penmanship error and an assumption that snowballed over the years and got turned into a family story. Things like that. Doesn't mean anybody lied, just a mistake, which is why verification is important. I know who I am. I don't need to join a tribe. Okay, but most of us are tribal people. We are collectivist people. Most of us are not Cherokee all alone in our living rooms in Michigan. Most of us have connections and kinship, and the saying that it doesn't matter who you claim to be, what matters is who claims you. So there is a thing called impact over feelings or impact over intentions. Many of you have probably heard of that. The impact of the harmful behaviors of pretendians against real Indians outweighs their feelings at being challenged or their intentions as non-Indians. So I'm going to show you something about that in a minute. So a few more examples. There are people out there doing some incredible things. There is the cult leader I told you about earlier who has killed somebody in a fake ceremony. Somebody else died in her suspiciously. They think it was suicide, but it was suspicious circumstances. And she's claiming to be a Cherokee medicine woman. And so to people who don't know any better, that looks weird and bad. There is a group in Georgia who I talked about who opened their own bank. There's people who write music. I'm gonna name a name, but this is a name that we've all already heard about for a long time, and it's already been discussed at length that Rita Coolidge is not Cherokee, and she wrote a very popular song on her Walela album, the Cherokee Morning Song, and it's the Wende Yahoo, right? That is not Cherokee. There is nothing Cherokee whatsoever about that. That is not a song that any of us sing in the morning. We do have Cherokee morning songs. That is not one of them. And Wende Yahoo is gibberish in Cherokee. So Elvis is another one. There's always pictures of this poor woman floating around the internet mourning White Dove, and said she's his great-great-grandmother. Well, that woman was actually a woman named Eats No Meat, and she was a member of the Cayuse tribe living very far from the Cherokee. He had no Cherokee ancestry. There's lots of academics making a lot of money writing books and teaching and intimidating people around them to keep their positions. Not good. And then there is this. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. See if I can.
And Lianna, you're about.
Am I at time?
Yeah, you're close. A little bit more time.
Let's just do that one thing then from Faith Spotted Eagle for a couple of minutes, and then I'll be done. So sharing my screen. Let me get that up there. Okay. And sound. It's already on, so it should work. Can you guys see that okay?
The challenge has been to not reify colonialism. And so that's the danger. And the other danger is that the camp has begun, and it's not danger, it's just reality, that the camp is starting to reflect what is in the outer world, that we are 1% of the population. So now the camp has, at this stage, many months into this situation, or this rebirth, is that probably 80% of the camp is non-native. And so that presents a challenge of, okay, here we are now, we're confronting settler colonialism again. And you even see that on the grounds, because some of the settlers that have come in unknowingly, it's almost like in their DNA, they're scrapping for space on the campground. And so it's like they're building. It's like they can't control themselves, and houses are going up, and they're just like grabbing. And so that's their task, to realize that they have that settler mind. And then our task is to realize that we will make mistakes, but we have to not reify what happened before. And I think it's important for everybody who goes to a setting like that, including outsiders, but more so from the people who come from this land, is that a fundamental thing in leadership is to understand what your role is. If you don't know what you're doing here, you're in the way, and you become a burden. And it's kind of like if you go stay with your auntie, you're expected to fold your blankets, you're expected to take out the trash, you're expected to, if necessary, get that job right away to help her pay the electricity. And so some will show up here with nothing. And so that puts a burden on the camp. And so we try to, as much as possible, to make people aware that Standing Rock is bearing the burden. It's going to be a challenge, because there are non-native people who have come here, bless their hearts, that are looking for their spirits. And to them, I say, we want you also to heal from what happened with your culture, because there was a fallacy of the melting pot that came, that was created in America, which meant that they could no longer be their immigrant population. They had to be Americans, and they shamed them into being who they were. So now they're looking to try to be Indians, and we don't have their answer. We need for them to stand in their full spirit, otherwise they're away.
So that was from Standing Rock. I was at Standing Rock for the winter of 2016 as a medic and a midwife. And the joke had become that Standing Rock had become Plymouth Rock because of so much settler colonialism that was happening around us. It was incredible. So there's a lot more to talk about. I want to show you for 1 second. Oh, can you do the screen sharing one more time just for a document? I'm going to flash it real quick.
Yeah, sure. 1 second.
And then I'm done. Is it good? Okay, there it is. So, and I think it's going to be here. I have to bring it there. Can you see it? This
Yeah.
is the Cherokee Scholar Statement on Sovereignty and Identity. So if you look up online, think Jalagi with the TSA LAGI, and then Cherokee Scholar Statement. Oh,
When
okay,
people
sorry.
come here,
This
they have
Cherokee
this
Scholar Statement on
romantic-
Sovereignty and Identity, and it's got a little numbered thing here, but there's one down here that says, any person who publicly identifies as Cherokee has initiated a public discussion about their identity, period. So, you know, and it's important to talk about that too. We don't have time now, but thank you very much. And I'm gonna shut this down now. Thank you all.
Lianna, thank you for that presentation and those good words. And our next speaker tonight is Guy Lopez. He's Crow Creek Sioux Tribe citizen and the co-founder of the Native American and Indigenous Studies Center Initiative at the University of Virginia. He is the former coordinator of the Mount Graham Coalition and the National Sacred Lands Protection Coalition. He holds a BA in sociology from Colorado College and an MA in anthropology from the University of Virginia. In the past 12 years, he has been working for a federal agency that oversees federal agency compliance with historic and cultural preservation laws of the USA. Please welcome Guy Lopez.
Thank you. Thank you, Gordon. And I want to thank all the other panelists, Professor Kim Tallbear, Jacqueline Keeler, Indian Country's premier investigative journalist, Chief Barnes, Shawnee Nation, and all the other panelists. Trevino brings plenty. I want to thank you for having this this discussion, because it's really needed in Indian country. And I want to reach the people out there, the students, the professors. I'd like to reach you with you know, a message about, I guess, making a commitment in your own work to continue our indigenous way of life and the ethical framework that we have subscribed to, that have brought us to this place where we exist and we still live in spite of everything. We have a code of ethics that I think in many ways it's taken advantage of because it's our good nature. We're friendly and open, welcoming. And so sometimes our good nature is taken advantage of. And but one word of advice that I want to share that my mother always would tell me growing up. I grew up being called Guy, or my mom called me Guy, from early age. She said, Guy, don't let anybody take your spirit. She'd always say that if I let anyone get me upset, or if I were too preoccupied with what other people thought, and because ordinarily I'd be in a good mood and happy. And I think in general, that's our state of affairs. And we're normally happy and good people. And I think we got to figure out ways to keep pretendians and also people like the settler colonialists who they're part of from taking our spirit and using it inappropriately, and taking our culture and our way of life. So I'm going to talk about my university that I graduated from with a master's degree in anthropology, where I studied the cultural and historic preservation laws of the country. It's the University of Virginia. And why I'm talking about that in this context of the Pretendians is, it's, in part it's because I know the university pretty well, and because I've been associated with it for almost 20 years. I first went there in the early 2000s, and I've been battling and advocating and fighting and organizing to try to get an Indigenous Studies program going. And it's been a long, hard road. but I think we've made some breakthroughs, and I think it's a generally positive report that I have. And I want to share with you the strategies we used, which have helped us overcome sort of what I would consider a real bias that the university has to pretendians. You know, it's been a great place if you're a pretendian, you know, go to the University of Virginia. But I think that's going to change. And some would question, you know, they'd say, why do we care about these elite, you know, institutions that really don't care about us? And I think it's because, for me, it's because, you know, my path led me there. I came there as an activist when I worked with the Mount Graham Coalition, because the university was considering joining a partnership with the observatory in Arizona. And someone gave them $10 million, you know, to their astronomy department, one of their alums. And I was the coordinator of the Mount Graham Coalition. So I came to the university to appeal to them not to join the partnership. And I organized, but ultimately I failed to get them to see it my way. But what they did in response, they organized a committee of faculty, and they pledged to safeguard the cultural rights of the Apaches, who were the most concerned, you know, the people with the history with Mount Graham, the Western Apache. So they pledged to safeguard their cultural rights. And they also pledged to build an Indian program and to recruit more Native students and faculty. And they made some big promises. And I always wanted to go back to grad school. So I thought, you know, I can go back to grad school, and I think I'll see what happens here, see if they follow through. And so I applied to the University of Virginia, along with a good friend of mine, a Monacan woman named Karen Wood. We worked at the same organization, the Association on American Indian Affairs, where I coordinated their Sacred Lands program. And my friend, who's since passed away, she coordinated the repatriation program. So we went back to the university. We went to the University of Virginia, and we started going to school there and studying. And unfortunately, what happened, the administrators who made the promise to us to build programs and to safeguard the cultural rights, they all left. They got better jobs. One of them became the provost, Gene Block. He went to UCLA. I think he became the chancellor there. The dean of arts and sciences, he went to become a president at another university. And the professors who were on the committee that had promised to safeguard the rights of the Apaches, I think one of them got sick, and then another one just didn't. I think maybe she felt isolated and without the support, because the institution lost its memory and it moved on. So there was no building of Indian programs, hiring of new faculty, and no safeguarding of the cultural rights of the Apaches. But yet I was still in school there. So I came to the University of Virginia as an activist, and I kind of got stuck there for a while. And but I thought, since I'm here, I'm going to advocate for them to keep their promises. And they didn't. So I'm wondering if Gordon or Taylor, can you show the slideshow, the one that I brought that I sent to you? Can you bring that up on the screen?
Absolutely. Is it visible?
Yes. Okay, so Taylor, you have control of the slides, right?
Yeah, just tell me when to click next.
Okay. All right, so I'm from here. I'm from this area of the country on my mother's side, who's a full-blooded Dakota woman. And on my father's side, I'm a Mexican-American from New Mexico, and that's where I am now. And I've come from the reservation on the right side. It's the only land on the river, on the east side of the river, Missouri River. that's part of that bigger land base. It's called the Crow Creek Sioux Reservation. And this shows, you know, in the gold or the yellowish kind of gold, it shows our reservations that we have left, but then it shows our greater land base. Next.
All right, it's not letting me. Give me 1 second.
Oh, well.
There it goes.
Oh yeah, this is my great-great-grandfather, Chief Bear Ghost. He was a tribal leader. He signed treaties, and I descend from him. My great-grandmother, I knew when I was very, very young, and she didn't speak English, or I never heard her speak English. Next.
Sure why it's not letting me move very easily here. Sorry about this.
Okay, this is a model that I developed, which is, you know, the idea that we've heard a lot about. We need to take care of 7 generations in our thinking. And I think, you know, I heard this, you know, you hear about this and it's, you know, it's an idea, but oops. Well, if you look at it, there's 4 circles and there's 7 different parts, and each part represents a generation. And in our life, if we knew our great-grandparents and we become great-grandparents, we'll have direct interaction with 7 different generations. So the idea is that we would meditate on this our whole life and learn how to take care of the generations by listening to the people that came before us, our elders, our parents, great-grandparents, and as we become great-grandparents ourselves eventually, hopefully, if we live that long. So this is sort of a model, you know, I think I see it more like a spiral, you know, and moving not linearly, but it's moving like a spiral. And we're surrounded by this. It's more like a spiritual context that we live within. This guides a lot of my thinking, and I just wanted to share it. Next. So this is why I ended up at the University of Virginia, in part because of the Louisiana Purchase, right? When Thomas Jefferson commissioned Lewis and Clark, who are from Charlottesville, Virginia, and so is Thomas Jefferson, and that's where the University of Virginia is. He commissioned them to go explore and claim this land as part of the domain of the United States, and to stake a claim to it, you know, to do whatever, however that's done. And my reservation, my nation is right in the middle of that. And they claimed it illegitimately. And we've been contesting it ever since. There's been wars and many lawsuits, and we're continuing to contest it to this day. And we will until we no longer need to. Next. So this is Thomas Jefferson standing in front of the rotunda. It's, you know, a World Heritage Site, the university, one of the few universities in the world to be a World Heritage Site. Thomas Jefferson designed the university, the architectural design, and was built, you know, back in the early 1800s, 18 teens and 1820s when it was constructed, I believe. Next. That's Monticello, which is on a big hill in Charlottesville overlooking the town. And that's part of the World Heritage Site. And it's on the nickel. And, you know, so you can see it from all kinds of places around the city of Charlottesville, or the town. Next. So the UVA, it's called the flagship university of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And it has quite a pedigree, you know, historically. A lot of presidents were involved, were there when the cornerstone was laid. And for many years, it's been considered, you know, even in the top 2 or 3 public universities in the USA. And last year it had an endowment of $14.5 billion. So if they are receiving a 10% return rate, it's generating $1.45 billion a year. That's how, you know, it's a very wealthy public institution. So like I said, it's a World Heritage Site. But I'm arguing today that for us, for Indian people, and really for everyone, I think it's more accurate to refer to UVA as a flagship institution of American settler colonialism. Next. And this is one reason why I say that, because this shows the Commonwealth of Virginia at various stages in its history. So when the country was, well, when the Commonwealth was founded in 1607, or when Jamestown was settled, and then I don't know the significance of 1609, but at that time, the colony of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia, extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And then, you know, that became smaller as they, you know, began to understand the layout, the geographics of the country. But when the USA was founded, the Commonwealth of Virginia included all the area around the Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley. And so when the University of Virginia and Thomas Jefferson, you know, when they think of, well, their history with the Commonwealth of Virginia is much more extensive. So, you know, when, like, if I could do a land acknowledgement, because, you know, to acknowledge the Monacan nation, because they're the ones who resided in where the University of Virginia is located. But if I look at the entire Commonwealth of Virginia, they've had a great impact on all the tribes near the Great Lakes, all the tribes in the Louisiana Purchase area, you know, and all that area lead right up to the Mississippi River. They had, you know, that was the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then on the bottom right, that shows the present day Virginia, you know, after West Virginia seceded from Virginia. Next. And here's another map. That area of the Great Lakes, it says it was claimed by Virginia until 1784. So next. So this statue, which we led a successful campaign to remove this statue from the university last year. But it was a huge statue at the eastern entrance of the university, and it honored George Rogers Clark. And you can see, and from the engraving on the pedestal, it says Conqueror of the Northwest. And it shows 3 soldiers with George Rogers Clark confronting 4 Indians, including a woman holding a baby in a cradle board. Next. So in my work in research about the university, I ran across this quote from Thomas Jefferson in one of the early planning meetings of the university. And I want to share it with you because it's very telling as far as the mindset of Thomas Jefferson and the institution that he founded. So I'm going to play a recording of Thomas Jefferson as played by my son, who's going to read the quote. He had an English accent, so I wanted you to hear this in, you know, with the English accent. So, and I wanted to include my son in this. So next.
But education has advanced us beyond the condition of our indigenous neighbors, and what chains them to their present state of barbarism and wretchedness but a besotted veneration for their supposed superlative wisdom of their fathers, and the preposterous idea that they are to look backward for better things and not forward, longing, as it should seem, to return to the days of eating acorns and roots rather than indulge in the degeneracies of civilization. And how much more encouraging to the achievements of science and improvement is this than the desponding view that the condition of man cannot be ameliorated, that what has been must ever be, and that to secure ourselves where we are, we must tread with awful reverence in the footsteps of our fathers.
So this was a quote at a meeting when they were planning the University of Virginia, or the institution that would become the University of Virginia. And they were talking about the curriculum of the university. And so they recorded this in notes. And this is what Thomas Jefferson had to say about the indigenous neighbors and their knowledge and their reverence for their elders and the beliefs and the knowledge and the experience of their elders. So, I ask you to recall the circles of 7 generations and kind of contrast it. So this statement basically became the policy of the University of Virginia up until a few years ago, because in the 200 years of its existence, it had no indigenous studies degrees, except for a couple years ago, they approved a minor degree in American Indian Studies. It was literally 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it was the first degree. And in all that time, it's very hard to identify if there have been any tenured Native American professors who identified as Native American and worked on Native American studies. They had a few professors who had, identities, tribal membership, but some of them didn't identify. They didn't identify as such. One was adopted. He didn't come to that realization till he was much older, after he retired. And then another one that was tenured was only there for a short time, and he was just there to be there for a few months. Well, for a short time, because he used to be a congressman, and it was kind of like one of those jobs, you just have, if you're very, up and coming, innovative, and sought after, you go to the university, you have the job for a while, then you move on to something bigger and better. So for a short time, we had the professor who became, I believe, the president of the University of Tulsa, former congressman. I can't remember his name right now. But I want you to think about this quote or remember it, because it's a direct attack on indigenous studies. Okay, next. This is the statue again. Next. And there's the caption below. Next. And this is a close-up of the woman appealing to George Rogers Clark to stop, leave him alone. Next. And there's the cradle board she's holding. Next. And this fellow, you can't see him from the front of the statue, but he's sneaking up behind the horse around to attack the Indians from the back. And this is another statue in Charlottesville, which we were able to organize to bring down. It's a statue of Lewis and Clark, and cowering hunched below them is Sacagawea. And this was considered by some of Sacagawea's descendants, her family ancestors, people who considered her, I think she was you know, a great aunt or something like that. They came to Charlottesville and they pronounced this statue as the worst statue in America of their ancestor. Next. This is a monument that the African American community, or just the whole community, finally was able to acknowledge the enslaved workers who built the university. Next. This is a resolution from the State House of Virginia to mark the 400th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown, you know, which happened in 1607. And next. And in that resolution, it talks about Native Americans in Virginia and their contributions. Next. But this is the resolution that came from the University of Virginia leadership, their board of visitors. And the resolution doesn't mention any Native Americans. They were erased from the acknowledgement for some reason. They weren't included. Next. Oh, here's that quote again. Next. So, you know, I work in the federal government, and so I wanted to share this with you. But recently, the White House, they have taken an interest in changing federal policy making, and they want to include indigenous knowledge in federal policy decisions. And they're looking for comments that support indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge. And so this is quite the opposite of Thomas Jefferson's philosophy and, you know, the institutions practice for 200 years, you know, where there was no inclusion of Native Americans in the faculty or, okay, next. So here's where I'm going to tell you about one of the strategies we use to try and help overcome our being erased. And this is something I would recommend to any university community where there's a Native Americans who aren't being recognized in terms of their tribal identities. If that institution uses what is called the Common Application, which is used by 900 different universities around the country. The Common Application, it's an online application. And I would say most of the college students in the country use it to apply to college these days. So on the Common Application, it asks you what race you are, basically, or how you identify yourself. And you can choose the option American Indian or Alaska Native. Next. So if you choose American Indian or Alaska Native, down below there's a spot where you can relate more about your tribal identity. And it asks you to click if you're enrolled in a tribe. And then below that, there is a pull down menu that you can click on where it says, please choose the tribe you are enrolled in. If you click there, all the federally recognized tribes show up and you can pick one. And then below that is the tribal enrollment number space. So this data is collected by everyone, well, every university that uses the Common Application, they have access to this data. And the students or the applicants who are, you know, inputting their information, they have the full expectation that this information will be considered by the university in the admissions process. And for those who are tribal members who indicate a tribe, this is their national origin, which is a protected category. Which, you know, the EEOC has regulations where mandating no discrimination in regards to these protected categories. So here is where the Indians indicate their national origin. Next. And at the University of Virginia, we were also able to get them to list the state tribes because it is the state of Virginia. And so we included 4 more tribes who were state recognized. Next. So, going back to the common application information, we were able to use that as a successful strategy to get the University of Virginia to change their admissions practice. So whereas before there were all kinds of applicants self-identifying as Native, when this data started becoming available, we said, can you take it into account? Can you include it in reports? Can you start using it when you consider admitting students? These are the tribal members, you know, the ones who provide tribal numbers. That should be taken into account. It'd be factored in as a positive factor. And we should work and build that population of students. And it took forever. It took several years, and before they finally agreed to take it into account. And it was, you know, the work of our coalition, well, of our group. We finally got them to agree to do it. And my understanding is that it is improving the number of American Indian students who are tribal members. And any university that is using the common application, they should be able to generate reports about tribal applicants, and there should be conversations about this very same thing. And it's, you know, I think the university is somewhat vulnerable to arguments about data. Like, how could you discard the data? How could you not consider it? But I think the argument that won the day, which created leverage, was the fact that it is our national origin. And if they don't take it into account, they're discriminating against us because they take into account the national origin of everybody else. For example, if you're from Italy and you apply to the university, they do not ignore the fact that you're an Italian and you're from Italy. They take it into account, and they use it in their admissions decision because they're looking for a diversity of students, an international diversity. But when it comes to Indians, they didn't take it into account. They threw it out, and they just looked at us like a race. This is a strategy we can use across the country. And so I wanted to share it with you to overcome this problem that's been ongoing for so long, where students apply and indicate they're Native American and you never see them again. Maybe when they want to go to grad school, they'll become Indians again. I don't know. So I think you get the point, and I encourage you all to do it. Contact me, I'll help you develop it, whatever your strategy approach is. Next. Oh, wait, hold on. This is another strategy. Okay, this image on the screen is a report of a commission that the university created. I don't know how much time I have left here. Yeah, I might be getting, well, this is a report. Oh, go ahead, Gordon.
No, it take about 10 more minutes if you need it. I think we're
Oh,
almost
okay.
at 30.
Okay, see this report, if you see at the top, it's the President's Commission on the University in the Age of Segregation. And so when they announced the creation of this commission, I jumped in there and I said, can you nominate and appoint to the commission some Native Americans? Because we experience segregation in the country. For example, the Jim Crow laws apply to us too. And another example is When they created the reservations, for many of them, we weren't allowed to leave the reservations without a pass. We were required to stay on our reservation. Thus the term, they're off the reservation. It's kind of a term in the English language, saying. So I made the argument that Indians experienced segregation. In fact, we weren't allowed to vote until 1921. And in state elections, some of us didn't get to vote until like the 1950s. So, and then our families, our children were segregated from their parents systematically for generations. They experienced a brutal form of segregation. So I made the argument that you got to have Indians on the commission on segregation. And, but they didn't work with Indians. They didn't include us on the commission. And they didn't talk to us in developing their report. So that's the way things had been at the University of Virginia for a long time. We were erased, not considered, even in something as big as this commission on segregation. We were ignored, just invisible to the leadership, even in the face of a very solid argument. However, next, in the university's grant writing, like this particular grant was recently given, awarded December 11th, 2020. It was a $5 million award. When it was first listed on this website, it was entitled Race, Place, and Equity, Indigenous and Black Histories. And you can see in the subtitle paragraph, it talks about Indigenous and Black histories. That used to be in the title. So we heard about it and looked at it, got a copy of it. And lo and behold, it talked about Indigenous peoples. It mentioned Virginia tribes specifically. Specific tribes were listed in the grant. And the organization that our Indigenous Studies group was included in the grant. However, we had no knowledge of it. Our names were in it. It was proposed and awarded. We had no idea that it was happening. We weren't included. And it was about us. And so the University of Virginia presented an image to the Mellon Foundation to get $5 million. And they presented it as though we were part of it, but we weren't. We had nothing at the University of Virginia except a statue that celebrated our conquest. And that was one of the arguments we made against the statue, that now they've taken it down. But that's all we'd had at the University of Virginia, was that statue. So, but however, in this grant, they talk about the previous commission on segregation as being an example of how Indigenous peoples were being represented and looked after and included at the university. Something they didn't include us in at all. They used it in their grant and talked about that in the context of Indigenous inclusion. And they made a case for how diverse they were, because they wanted the grant to appear that as such. However, we didn't even know about it. And we were actually in conversation with the principal investigator, one of the provosts. The principal investigator of this grant was in conversation with us about this very same topic. And as he wrote the grant and submitted it and got it, he didn't tell us about it at all. We were unaware of it. So when we found out about it, we raised it as an issue. And then immediately they decided to give $50,000 to one of the local tribes, which was 1% of 5 million. And then we were very, in an uproar. We said, no, that's not enough. And we had meetings with the deans and provosts and And at first they argued this grant had nothing to do with indigenous peoples. That was not the intent. And we said, well, the text, proves otherwise. So we created leverage with this grant because it got to the point where I decided that I stated to the provost and the deans, and I said, I'm going to file a formal complaint with the Mellon Foundation. And what I'm doing here with you in this meeting is exhausting my administrative remedies because that's what their guidelines require. We have to try to resolve this internally. So that's why we're meeting today. And if we can't resolve it, then I can move on and file the formal complaint with the Mellon Foundation. And I found the rules that allowed me to do that. So I think that was a big motivation for the university to revise the grant implementation. And now we've got a couple of faculty possibilities. We've got a few postdocs. We've got other positions, but it changed their perspective. And someone got overruled by, higher ups in the university. And so I want to acknowledge the value of enlightened leadership at a university where, it's not everyone arrayed against us. And sometimes we have to go to the mat and take a strong stand. But I kind of did it alone because the faculty and staff, they thought they really couldn't sign on to a complaint to the Mellon Foundation without jeopardizing their careers. So, and I was fine with that because I'm not depending on the University of Virginia. But I want to tie this all back to the pretendian thing. This this university has been, so great for the pretendians because, before tribal enrollment was even counted or included or recorded, you didn't have to be a tribal member to be an Indian at the University of Virginia. And that was basically the policy. And it kind of subscribed to Thomas Jefferson's policy, which was we had to be removed from the east to the west, and then we had to assimilate in order to survive. That was our only hope. And Thomas Jefferson is credited with being the intellectual architect of the removal policy. And then he promoted in his notes on the state of Virginia, our assimilation. So as so long as you didn't challenge the institution and ask for recognition of indigenous peoples and programs, you could fit right in at the university. You could thrive there. But if you were someone like myself, who I saw the way they were relating to the rest of the country and celebrating the Jeffersonian legacy, there was no one being able to speak back. The indigenous peoples of the Dakotas had no voice at the University of Virginia, you see.
So Guy, if you could wrap it up, we have one more thing we have to take care of. I apologize. It's a great talk, and we're all learning from your strategies for dealing with this kind of thing. I appreciate it. Sorry about that, my man.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you for telling me. Yeah, so I thank you all for listening, and contact me if you need any help. And I think we're getting somewhere at the university, and we've had our share of pretendian issues. We're not going to let them get in our way, and we'll continue to build something for the indigenous nations and their members. Thanks.
Thank you, Guy. And now Lianna's going to read a letter, and then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A.
Okay. So this letter is coming to us from a beloved and respected colleague who did not feel safe participating, sadly, which speaks to everything we've been hearing. The issue of bullying is very real. So this is their letter that I am going to read anonymously for them. First, I wanted very much to participate in this important conference, but I can't. Lianna will read why in a minute. Second, I hope that everyone watching appreciates the speakers. All of them have paid their dues and all of them are honest. Everyone who organized this conference and who agreed to speak are among the bravest people I know. I greatly admire and stand by Jacqueline Keeler. The comments made about her on Twitter and Facebook are libelous and ignorant. Make no mistake, she and others speaking here are authoritative voices. Challenge them at your peril. I started this statement multiple times, then deleted the files because the last thing I want is to bore anyone or to come across as whining. The speakers that you have heard in last weeks and the ones set to talk are people whom I trust, admire, and depend on. Some have listened to me cry, curse, and drone on and on about this issue. I curse when I'm out of sorts, so it's probably better that Lianna reads this. I decided to proceed with my statement after much conversation with organizers and participants. I now realize that there are more people impacted by the race shifters than I thought. I have been dealing with them for over 30 years. It is easy to feel isolated when you think you are the only one victimized by their violence. And the bombardment we endure for some weird reason makes us feel guilty that somehow we are at fault. And if we are in academia, that we are crappy scholars and the race shifters are better than us, so we should just shut up and let them take over. I have written about this previously, but to be brief, this is not a new issue to me. Gordon Henry and I discussed this problem of race shifters over a decade ago. I think we called them frauds back then. And I was on a repatriation committee with Wilma Mankiller 30 years ago when she outed a fraud who claimed to be Cherokee. It was a long, ugly story, and I admired her for dealing with him. No one else could have dislodged him. She was the chief, after all. If not for her, this guy and his brother might have become your supervisors at some point. But ironically, I did not admire her response to the person who asked her at a repatriation conference why she thought of, or what she thought about frauds. I consider it a compliment, she answered. Be very aware that even natives will screw us on this topic. I dealt with race shifters in graduate school and the first institution where I worked. One was violent after being called out, and I never went to my office unless I knew the building was populated. I never went on weekends. Anyway, there is no better when dealing with race shifters, only worse. I wanted very much to participate in this important conference, but I can't. Why? Because my job is on the line. I am not ready for unemployment, nor do I want to retire. I still have a lot to do and I want to teach. But here I am on a tenuous fence because of one reason. I told my college deans that there are faculty from our university who are on the pretendian list. That is, there are faculty here who are not who they claimed to be when they applied. All were hired because they asserted themselves as natives. To be more specific, there are 6 race shifters associated with this place, counting the 3 who have recently left. The latter 3 took their fraudulent personas with them. 2 held authoritative positions before they left. 1 was chair of Indigenous Studies here. She packed up her office in the middle of one night and disappeared. Not even the students knew about her new job. She left them to discover an empty office and to struggle with completing their degrees. Now she heads a Native Studies program at a prominent university in the Southwest. 2 others hold prominent positions at my school. Fun fact, Native faculty did not know about this person being a finalist for the position until the day she came to campus. I received a call that day from a well-known Native writer, a National Book Award finalist, telling me that this person had applied for multiple positions and that she does not speak the tribal language she claims. And it was his tribe. Native faculty said hell no to her hire, but our chair had already told the dean it was a unanimous yes vote. She was hired. A third, who is still here, was outed years ago by the chairman of the tribe he claimed. This person lost a court case in 2000 because he could not prove he was discriminated against because of his race. His court case is online and anybody can read it. He still teaches, takes up space, and requires students to buy his book that is based upon the stories he fabricated and claims were told by his Comanche grandmother who lived in Pittsburgh. His book was turned down by a major university press. He sued and lost in a court of law. And I repeat, he is still here. I called him out shortly after I arrived on this campus over 15 years ago. In retaliation, he composed a disparaging letter about me and sent it to over a dozen Indigenous Studies, Native Studies programs throughout the country. He used our Indigenous Studies stationery, an envelope with our department's return address, put a stamp on it, and signed it as if the entire program had written the letter. In this libelous letter of nonsense, he stated that I was attempting to take over the department, misbehaved as a person, and other outlandish claims I prefer to forget. My colleagues from across the country called to let me know they had received it. My dean promised to investigate this letter as a federal offense because he misused the Postal Service, but that never happened. The person responsible for making sure this race shifter was hired at my school is not quite a full blood, but close enough. He is a 15/16 native blood who also defended Ward Churchill. This person also made certain that 3 other frauds made it to my university. Do not underestimate the voices of sellouts, even those who proclaim themselves, quote, traditional. He did absolutely nothing to defend me, nor did any of my colleagues, and I'm still dealing with the fallout. Because of this race shifter's aggressiveness, I began teaching online and rarely come to campus. After all, he carried a bona fide Bowie knife strapped to his thigh. When I do come to campus, I keep not just my office door locked, but also the outer door leading to the suite of offices. I taught an in-person class 2 years ago and kept my classroom door shut as if a shooter might barge in at any time. It was too stressful, and I will not do that again. This man and the spineless deans who refused to deal with him have completely changed my life. 2 other race shifters who remain at my university hold prestigious positions. One position is reserved for a person of color. He claims to be a descendant of 5 tribes. The other race shifter is director of a large center. Both are thoroughly defended by white and native protectors. Perhaps 14 years ago, I and another senior native faculty member staunchly objected to the hiring of the latter race shifter. My colleague at the time was director of a major program on campus and has since left to become dean elsewhere. She had asked this race shifter pointedly about the family he claimed, and he could not answer a single question about them or about his tribe. I also spoke with a colleague who worked with this person at his university. They really wanted to get rid of him. He was known as a fraud there. The aforementioned chair made certain this person was hired. In fact, native faculty said, again, hell no to his hire, yet the chair told the dean it was a unanimous positive vote, just as he did with the female hire. Back to that Zoom meeting last year, an associate dean asked me who these people are on the list. I told him. His smiling face changed faster than I could blink. Or as my grandmother would say, he looked like he dropped his teeth. All 3 of these people are under his watch and he will protect them. Instead of asking me why being a pretendian or race shifter is a problem, or asking how one might uncover such a deception, his response went like this. So you are the arbiter of who is qualified to teach about Indian history and culture? Me? I am an enrolled citizen of a federally recognized tribe and a descendant of another with 19 books and 24 book awards. My family is documented through dozens of tribal documents, including the Dawes roll, removal roll, marriage lists, election records, tribal supreme and district court documents, sheriff and district judge records, newspaper articles, Indian and pioneer paper testimonies, census records, and even 1880s grocery receipts. My family lived and still live all over the tribal lands. My family are buried there. We retain the mineral rights to the family allotment. My grandmother is an original Dawes enrollee. But the voices who are favored over mine, the ones with 0 records connected to any tribe, who are the natives defending these frauds? Natives with delicate strings attached to the tribes they claim. Both were given positions of distinguished professor, and both are given absolute carte blanche to whatever it is they want to do. My program has now been discontinued. As of July 1st, I will have no program to work in. According to the deans, no one questions the quality of my scholarship, teaching, or service records. Supposedly, quote, everyone recognizes my worth. That is, how much revenue I can bring in and how I can make my university look great from the outside. But none of that matters. It is all about me being, quote, divisive because of this pretendian issue, and therefore I am not acceptable to join any program that also cross-lists courses with the race shifters, defendians, and white gatekeepers who they desperately want to protect. This diatribe has the potential to go on for way too long. What I want to get across is that those of you with similar stories are not alone. Those of us who speak out are denied jobs, promotions, and book awards. We watch as race shifters take the speaking engagements and are invited to contribute to writing projects. They get book contracts, are held up as authoritative voices, and they, along with their defenders, proceed to malign us on social media. Those who know nothing about the topic tend to believe the frauds and their defenders, not us. I still put my trust in those who speak here. They are doing the heavy lifting, and I do believe in karma. I wish everyone good luck and a happy life. And that is the end of the statement. And I want to add a quote to that I think is particularly fitting from John Trudell, who said, "Protect your spirit, because you are in the place where spirits get eaten." Thank you.
Thank you all for reading that, Lianna. It's a powerful statement. I guess we can turn to questions now. I think there are a few in the Q&A. So Guy and Lianna, if you want to have a look at those.
So 86% claim of being Native American. That's a staggering number. I'm still digesting that. This is from Marcia McDowell. What thoughts do you have about why there is such an increase? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think that some of the reasons that I mentioned are definitely true. And I don't know if this race shifting is just trying to avoid their whiteness, trying to avoid any accountability for making things better. I'm a board member with the NAACP, and we are always saying that people, white people should collect their fellow white people and help them learn what it means to be a good decolonized ally, right? Because there's no point in talking about blame, shame, any of that kind of thing with regard to racism today or the horrible things that result from it. But we are all beneficiaries of the white supremacist system that was created when this country was created. Because when we think about it, this country was literally founded on terrorism, the terrorism of the people who were already here, right? And genocide and kidnapping and slavery and lies and broken treaties and theft, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was created and it has never been dismantled. So we have inherited it, and it's not going to magically just disappear all by itself. It's going to take work, and guess what? Some awkward, painful conversations and some awkward self-reflection, looking at our own implicit biases and et cetera, acknowledging white privilege. I'm Cherokee. I'm a Cherokee through and through, but I am also white. And so I can take that on. If it's okay for me to take it on, I don't know why it's so hard for other people. But I suspect that a lot of this race shifting has to do with avoiding one's whiteness and avoiding one's responsibility as a consequence to be a participant in acknowledging the evils of the past in order to right that ship and go forward in a better way together. So I see a lot of that in the work that I do, because if you can claim to be indigenous, then I think a lot of people feel like that absolves them of claiming to be white and everything that entails. And they don't understand that they don't need to feel any guilt or shame or blame They just need to get up off their butts and contribute to creating the positive change. That's all. So those are my thoughts. But other than that, I just have no idea. I think there was a question for you, Guy.
Yeah, there's some are interested to know more about the common application data strategy. If your university uses the common application, they have that data. All the students who list their tribes and their tribal enrollment numbers, they're expecting it to be considered, and the university can generate a report about it. And they generate the admissions offices commonly generate a lot of reports about, different statistical categories. And it's enlisting them, the admissions office, in that conversation where you ask them for the data, you ask for the report, and you ask them how they're using it. And if they're not using it, why not? And then you make the argument that it's our national origin, and to not use it is discriminatory. We're being discriminated on the basis of national origin if they fail to recognize it as in their admissions process when they do that for everybody else. So that data exists, and it's a way to open up that whole conversation where we can refine who gets into the university, that our tribal members get in.
I think this other one might be for you too, Guy.
Can you see it,
You see
guys?
it?
It says, can you mention the 1763 Royal Proclamation line?
Okay, I think, isn't that the line established where no settlement was to occur, or no, the white people were supposed to stay out on the other side of the line, I believe. Is that correct? I'm not a historian, of early America really, but I think that's the line.
Yeah, they answered yes, both two people. Well, it doesn't look like there are many more questions out there. It's been a long night for us all, and we're going to continue tomorrow, and then we're going to have a 2-week break until mid-April. And there's another question that popped up, I guess. They must have heard me getting ready to close up. Let's see what we got. Oh, it says Jefferson, then we're fighting them. Okay. Just adding on to previous. So I do appreciate, again, all of you panelists and all you attendees for the support, as you heard in the letter and through our comments, that it's been a long, hard fight, as many things are. And we're still here, but we do need support. Some of us are getting older, some of us are getting tired, and we just look for that support from you all. And we hope you can join us for the next sessions tomorrow night. We hope to have a special guest tomorrow night, so please join us. Miigwech, everyone. We're going to close up now. Recordings will be available in the future. We're still working on it. Thank you so much.
Don't close it all the way.
Okay, then.
Just for a second. I'm capturing the chat. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to working with you, Guy.
All right, closing down.